Just going to jump right into it. Underneath the YouTube video that you are watching now, there are a couple of links to some articles and resources and things. George alluded to my presentation at Brighton SEO, which I did in the UK and in the US. You can check those out. So there's a link to the write-up for that presentation, and also to the deck. So if you click on the write-up, you can also see the deck from that. And in that, I talk about LLMs and the differences between a search-based LLM and a sort of static, non-search enabled LLM. And within those spaces, it's important to think about the different metrics. So I'm going to talk during this session about tools, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about which metrics matter before we get into them, so that we know what we're working with. So essentially, when we think about metrics that matter in this new paradigm of LLM optimization, which is what I'm calling it, some people call it GEO, some people are calling it LLM search optimization, generative engine optimization. There's lots of different things. I'm calling it LLM optimization. And essentially, we have two things that are definitely common. Conversions and traffic are definitely common. So if you know how to track conversions in SEO, and you know how to track traffic in SEO, then those skills will be applicable as you go into the LLM space. Similarly, and there's lots of different tools. So if we think about that, there's also evolving metrics. So we have the classic SEO measurements for things like impressions or share of voice. We have our keyword ranking, which is a tried and tested metric for us. Pages that are indexed in search engines, backlinks and referring domains, that sort of thing as well. And essentially with LLMs, we have a similar thing, but it's a slightly evolved. So for instance, with LLMs, we have things like brand mentions. So brand mentions aren't exactly the same as an impression, for instance, but they're very similar to share of voice. And they're very similar to sort of giving you the idea that, that you're kind of in the ballpark in terms of the topic, in terms of what's going on there. With keyword ranking is fairly straightforward. You got your 10 blue links and you're either first or you're 7th or you're 75th or whatever it is in terms of the ranking. But when it comes to LLMs, there's and I come up with a new mnemonic because I love a mnemonic. There's your citations and your mentions. And essentially, there's a RAPP framework that I think is really, really worth considering when you're thinking about where your citations are in LLM responses. Then you also want to think about retrieve pages that are known to LLMs. So an LLM won't necessarily be crawling the same pages that you might have indexed on a standard search engine. They might crawl some pages and not others, and it's worth knowing which ones are there. And then also with your backlinks, it's worth thinking about like which pages are providing the citation sources, whether they're from your domain or not. So let's get into these a little bit more. So let's think about citations and mentions. So if I was to ask ChatGPT, which I did, can you name an influential country music album from 2024? The first answer they gave was Cowboy Carter by Beyonce. And the thing that's interesting about this is that you've got two things. So you have your mention of Cowboy Carter by Beyonce, and then you have your citation. These things are two different things. You can be mentioned and not have a citation. So here they're mentioning Cowboy Carter, but they're not giving a citation to Beyonce's Cowboy Carter website, for instance. And you can be mentioned lots of times or have multiple citations and not even necessarily have your brand mentioned, for instance. So if you're thinking about, just to go back one, if you're thinking about like a topic, say around country music, and let's say you were a country music artist and you also had a blog that talked about various different country music things, it might be the case that your blog is a reference for the topic, but isn't necessarily mentioned. Let's say if you have like a top 10 country music albums blog, for instance, on your thing, it might be that you're referenced, but you're not like as a citation, but you're not necessarily mentioned. So it's very important to think about the mentions and citations, and most of the tools that are tracking AI in this and AI visibility will have a differentiation between your mentions and your citations. So again, it's similar to impressions, that it shows that your brand is included in the information around the topic, but might not necessarily lead to a click. And it shows that your brand is understood to be relevant to the topic as well. But again, may not necessarily include a link. So when we think about the citation, it's similar to your keyword ranking in that it sort of thinks about where your page is triggered and for which query. And then also when we think about citation, the value of a citation in an LLM is around RAPP, which I'll just get into very, very shortly. It's an acronym for something. So here's RAPP. Essentially, what you want to be thinking about is whether or not your content is regularly mentioned in website citations, whether it's accurate and factually represented in LLM responses, and whether your citation is prominent. So whether it's like the first one mentioned, like in that Beyonce one, for instance, or whether it's further down the list. And also you want to think about whether or not it's either positive or at least fair, right? So sometimes, maybe you've got a little bit of work to do with your product, or wherever you are with your brand, but at least it's at least fair. So that's something to think about there. So when we think about regularity, for instance, like on that one, I asked, can you name an influential country music album from 2024? Beyonce shows up top. Can you list some significant country pop albums by women? Beyonce's showing here, but she's showing further down. So she is showing for some of these topics. And so the regularity is absolutely there. And you can see that that's showing there. And but in terms of citations, the regularity isn't exactly there. So this one's from Wikipedia. This one is from like bestlifeonline.com. So the regularity there isn't exactly, and because they're different citations, but the topic there, the mention is similar. The other thing you would think about is accuracy. So here we say, can you name an influential album from 2024? And this is fairly accurate. It said that she won Album of the Year for at the Grammy Awards and all of that. So that's a good accurate representation as well. So that's a good one there. And then when we think about prominence, this is where we start seeing within some of these tools, for instance, and we'll get to that a little later, within some of these tools, they'll tell you where you're ranking. And by that, they'll mean like where you were mentioned in the listing. So here she's mentioned first, here she's mentioned fifth. And this one's actually interesting because when you look at the result here, the first one is showing, name an album generally, right? And that's giving you Beyonce, and that's kind of a general thing. The second one is, can you name a significant country pop album by women? The query here, the output here is actually doing it chronologically. So we've got Shania Twain's Come On Over from 1997, which like, let's go girls with that. I love that one. Dixie Chicks in 1998, Taylor Swift in 2012, Casey Musgrave in 2018, and then Beyonce in 2024. So on the one hand, you might say, oh, well, we're only ranking fifth on this particular query, and we were ranking first there, so maybe there's an issue. However, in this particular one, they're doing it chronologically, so that's not necessarily as much of an issue. It's just the way that they're doing that query. And then again, when we think about positive or fair sentiment, both of these things are coming in with positive sentiment, essentially. So one's saying, it was album of the year. It was her first country album. It was a top album. The next one's saying it was a bold exploration of country music and that sort of thing. So this is a good positive sentiment. And again, a lot of these tools are also assessing this. So that's great for that. So when we think about the metrics that matter, this is really, really important for us to be thinking about. The impressions are very similar to brand mentions. The keyword ranking is very similar to how the mentions and citations are within it. And then also the pages that are indexed, the pages that you're seeing in the responses are something to be considered. And also the pages that you're seeing are also referenced to the backlink. So for instance, if you've been doing work across your backlink activity that included, say, that Best Online website, for instance, then that's good to know that, oh, great, that backlink effort that we did actually made an impact. And if you're an SEO who's trying to make the transition to doing more LLM optimization, then there are some things that you can do. So for instance, when you're thinking about your share of voice, if you have tools that are already showing you who your competitors are, you can use that within some of these tools to benchmark yourself with competitors around your core topics. You can also use your keyword ranking to help you create prompts across some of the wider tools to understand what's going on with your projects and with your brand understanding within LLMs. And then also you can have a look at the most valuable pages for LLMs and the impact and to ensure the impact that's on those ones. And you can audit your backlinks to understand which percentage of the backlinks that you're working on that you've actively sought are included in the LLM training or are included in the LLM outputs that you're getting there. And then with that, I'm just going to pause for questions. George, I saw a couple come through there. And essentially, I think that one of the things that's important about the LLM optimization is just thinking that a lot of these things are very transferable. A lot of the tools are very similar to the SEO tools that we've seen over the years, and a lot of them are bringing in a lot of very recognizable, very quantifiable information. And George, did you have any questions that jumped out?
I think there's one that's worth showing here. By Quantum Quill Digital. I'm curious how these results change by person/account and location. Does it know how big of a Beyonce fan you actually are? So the question here is personalization. We have it in search engines to a degree, but are we expecting that level of volatility here where it may be totally different?
Yeah, so some of the tools, and I'll show these a little bit later because I'm going to go through quite a few of them. But some of them have user segmentation, where you can segment it down by where you're searching from, where your audience is searching from, and who those folks are and what their user journey is. So there's that. The other thing that's good about using a third-party tool is that it removes a little bit of that personalization from your activity. So if I'm using ChatGPT, they're probably going to know I'm a Beyonce fan, just like anybody who's followed anything I've ever done. And so it may very well impact that. However, if you're using a third-party tool, then they're doing mass queries on a regular basis, so it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of impact.
Yeah, so if you're in the same LLM tool, constantly looking up your own brand, having conversations with it about your brand, what you're getting back is probably not going to be exactly like what the general user, your target audience, is getting back, because they don't demonstrate that same type of user behavior. All right. I think we can move on. We have some more questions here, but I think that as we proceed, we're going to naturally answer them.
Okay, great. Can I jump to one from Roxy? I'm so sorry. I just saw it and I don't think I'm going to cover it.
All right, let's do it. Roxy Francis asks, how do we find third parties for backlinks? Is this that are hosting your backlinks or to get backlinks? The wording here is a little bit ambiguous, but Crystal.
Okay, so if we're talking about backlinks, generally speaking, for like classic SEO backlinks, we have some great topics around that. If you're new to the sort of backlink game, there's ways that you can get, get mentions and get listed and things. Digital PR is a really good way to do that, in an above board way. We have some great articles on that on the Wix SEO Learning Hub. If you're thinking about backlinks that could impact your presence on LLMs, within my document, again, it's linked underneath this YouTube video. There is a link to some of the media sources that are part of the data training sets for some of these major LLMs. So, for instance, ChatGPT has a partnership with The Atlantic, for instance, and that might be someone that you think about. Also, I think News Corp is another one, and that's one as well. And that might sound like, oh, that's a really big company that my small business might not be involved with. But actually, there's a lot of times where they have smaller businesses that are part of their media empire. So, for instance, my local newspaper is owned by the same company that owns the Daily Mail, which is owned by News Corp, et cetera. So, if I got something in my local News Corp, or in my local newspaper, that could potentially become part of that ecosystem as well. So it's worth thinking about that. But yeah, think about whether or not when you're thinking about your backlinks, be strategic and aim for ones that could potentially form part of the training data for an LLM if you want to optimize for LLMs.
All right, and please keep an eye on the chat. Even if you're not asking questions, I'm putting in a lot of resources there as people ask questions. Some of them may be relevant to you and some of the things that are going through your head as you listen.
No, George, can you help? It says there's a 404 on the link, which is an issue. So if you can find that link and update it to the chat, that would be great. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you for flagging that.
Cool. Okay, so and yes, Marius, it will be recorded. It'll be on YouTube. Okay, right. So let's get into some tools. So we're going to talk about which tools measure brand visibility in LLMs. And let's just start with a couple of tactics for everyone. So I mentioned that common metrics that matter for LLM presentations, or for LLM optimization, and also for SEO are everything. Essentially, one of the things that we can do in terms of conversions is tracking conversions from LLMs, and this is something that everyone can do. I thought that folks weren't thinking about this. But I saw Will Reynolds, who speak at Brighton SEO. He also mentioned this as well. So one of the things that they do over at SEO Interactive, who are very, very active in terms of LLM optimization, is they've added the how did you find us under their how did you hear about us. They've added ChatGPT as an option. This costs you nothing. Absolutely nothing. And you can implement this right now. And I've spoken to folks who have implemented this or who have started asking this question when they're having conversations with new prospects, and they're finding anecdotally, at least, that they tend to be good leads. Like, these aren't junk leads. And I've definitely, done PPC work where we've got junk leads and things like that. But they've said to me that, that they're getting good quality leads from these. So these are really, really useful. And it's also important. Another thing that Will points out is that it's worth speaking to these folks about, like, what were they searching for? What was their user journey? Why did they find that? And if you're a Wix user and you're joining us from that space, then this is something, again, that you can implement straight away. So you go to your forms tool, and you can click add form, and then you can click how did you hear about us, ChatGPT or AI assistant, and you can just add that in straight away. And it will add the links in there. And essentially, Will said that he updated this because he found that he was seeing traffic from ChatGPT and Perplexity growing, and he wanted to track if that traffic was more likely to turn into a qualified lead. So they added it in as a drop down and made it much, much easier for them to track it through to a closed deal. So again, this is something that costs absolutely nothing, and you can implement straight away. Filtering in GA4, Jordan, yes, absolutely. You can have a look in GA4. So the first person that I saw looking at this was Jess Schultz, and she was looking at this early in autumn. And I've got a link to the link here as well. And essentially what this does is it allows you to see it and to track it and to monitor it in the same kind of way that you normally do any other traffic. And there's a couple of different examples. There's a great article from Dan Taylor over on Search Engine Land that talks about it. This is his regex that he was using. Jess Schultz also shares a regex on her LinkedIn post here. And Dan shared a regex here as well. And this is something that you can add into your website. And you can add into your Google Analytics, and it will give you some information. So this is something that you can use it to make it an exploration, and basically you can filter all of that information, and then you can see some of the traffic, and you can start to get trend lines in terms of that. If you're completely new to GA4, if you're needing to get used to that, if you are on Wix, then you are very lucky because we have an integration for GA4, and we also have some great articles, and they're linked in this document. We have some great articles that talk about how to get started with GA4s, including how to create an exploration. We also have a full course with the incredible Jill Quick to help you with that as well. I saw someone who asked, how does adding ChatGPT to how do you hear about us automatically update algorithms? It doesn't update the algorithm for you, but it does help you to see who came through. So it's in that way, people say if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. And if you're able to measure that the work that you've done has helped you to get more leads, to get more traffic, etc., then that will help you to get more buy-in from your higher ups and help you move forward with this. Another one is referrers. So you can track referrers via analytics as well. So again, Wix users might be familiar with this panel, which is your Wix Analytics. And if you look under your top traffic sources, you can see referrers here as well. So this is where you can filter your report, and it can show you information about Chat, DeepSeek, Mistral, other AI tools as well. And you can see that coming through. So that's useful for you to do as well. And it's also worth looking at bot traffic. So there have been some really interesting articles that have been analyzing their bot traffic to see how ChatGPT and other tools are crawling different parts of their website. And within some of these tools, there are named bots that you can identify from some of their different things. So OpenAI, for instance, lists all of their bots by IP address, and you can see all of that full information there. In my article, which I believe has been linked now, you can also see links to some of those documentation pages if you want to see that bot traffic there. And if you are using the Wix bot log report, you can see some of the things. So a good example is Common Crawl, which forms the basis for many of the LLM trainings. You can see some of the activity of Common Crawl, and one of the things that you find with Common Crawl is it tends to crawl a whole site at once rather than crawling a few pages, which we see with Google Mobile, for instance. So it's worth jumping in and having a look at how it's behaving and seeing if there's anything that you need to modify there. Okay, so that's a couple of things you could just implement, check out straight away. Here's a couple of tools that you can use as well. So this, I'm going to start off with stuff that's fairly easy to access, and then we'll get into things that are a bit more deep dive. So SpyFu have a great tool that's really useful for browsing ChatGPT. So essentially what they've done is they've asked 250 million questions to ChatGPT. And what you can do is you can have a look at, you could ask it about your brand, right? You can just ask if it knows anything about your brand or your competitors or anything like that. And you can basically just search their database. And so I did, for instance, so I asked it about Crystal Carter. And the thing that I found interesting about this is essentially it's very similar to the experience that you have as an SEO when you are looking at the keywords that you're trying to rank for and the keywords that you actually rank for. And I think that that's always interesting. And essentially I found a couple of very interesting ones here. So one of the things that I found was that I looked at Crystal Carter, I found that I'm apparently one of the best TikTokers for SEO keyword research advice. I had no idea. I have a very small following, a very small elite following of approximately 300 people on TikTok. And so I'm very surprised that I came up as one of the best TikTokers for SEO there. Similarly, it also said like, who are the top SEO or top TikTokers in SEO? And it also said, again, Crystal Carter there as well. So I was very surprised at that. Well, the other thing I find is interesting is there's only one reference to me as a best TikToker on SEO, and it's actually a TikTok video that I posted with Ross Simmons, and in that video he called me the best TikToker in SEO. And so I think that's where that came from. It's the only place it's ever been. So I think that's really fascinating. So this one's a quite useful one if you just want to see. Yes, Jordan, thank you for following me. So this one's quite interesting if you just want to have a quick cursory look at your brand and where you are, and maybe get some of the higher ups, maybe get some of your folks interested in whether or not you're on ChatGPT. And that one's free to access. Another one is a custom GPT, which is from Aleda Solis. And we love Aleda Solis. She's contributed to our Wix SEO course, and she's got this great custom GPT. And it also says that, and basically what you can do is as soon as you click on the custom GPT, I've just jumped ahead, you can enter your website, and it will ask you a couple of questions. What do you do? What's your main product? What's the target scope? So I entered Wix Studio, which is a tool, a new CMS which launched in 2023, and it says that we are a web builder for professionals. We're a low-code website creator with AI functionality. It's suitable for professionals working with blog e-commerce, enterprise clients. We offer services worldwide that have a strong presence in the United States. And what it did was it came back with some brand recognition validation. I posed the questions to ChatGPT, and this is how it represents Wix Studio. Again, I've said when I was talking about, the quality of responses, it's giving me information on sentiment, it's giving me information on accuracy, and it's giving me information about whether or not it's coming through, which is good. And so this is really good. And as far as I can tell, this is pretty good in terms of my brand. And again, this one's free to use. So if you have Pro GPT, this is a free one to use, and it's a good one to get a sort of start of whether or not this is worth investing in. The other thing it went through was it was assessing whether Wix Studio is mentioned when users inquire about top web development platforms. So that's another one. They put that through and they're saying, yes, it was mentioned. No, it wasn't, or, we don't have specified sources, but it's telling you some of the information that's mentioned there. So again, this is a good one for letting you see, get people interested in some of the bigger tools maybe, and get them interested in how you perform on some of these GPTs. And then I want to shout out to myself. So someone said, thanks for looking at this. So this is a brand tracker that I put together, and it's essentially gives you prompts for your LLM, for your LLM visibility, and it's easily scalable with GPT for Sheets, which I'll get into shortly. And essentially, it allows you to source prompts to fit your needs and your preferences. It allows you to include personalized insights, recommendations, and you can fill in all of the bits that you need. And you can access these things free of charge to sort of, again, get you started on this journey. And essentially what it is I've got it broken down into your brand, your competitors, your brand entity, and your target audience. And it's also good as a prompt library to give you an idea of the kinds of questions that you might want to ask an LLM when you're thinking about your brand representation as well. And the next one is GPT for Sheets. So as I said, the last tool that I shared was one that is really useful for allowing you to create a custom tool for yourself, a custom dashboard even for your team. And GPT for Sheets allows you to sort of supercharge something like that. So the tool allows you to make bulk queries with or without an API key. And it supports almost 30 different models from OpenAI, Claude, DeepSeek, Perplexity, Mistral, others as well. And you can use it for creating custom reports, workflows, multiple stakeholders. It's really useful because it works with Excel, it works with Sheets, it works with Docs, and you can essentially use it with lots of different prompts. So for instance, on the one that I was using, my LLM tracker, when I was building the first draft of it, one of the things you can do is you can go GPT list. So here I had the prompt in C5, and then you can go GPT list, and then it will make prompts for me based on the elements that I've got there. And you can change which tool you're using. You can add in your own API keys. It's pretty whizzy. I like it. It's a good tool. And it's full for pretty much any size team. So that's good. We got a few questions in the chat. The chat's been a little active. George, have you got any questions there that you wanted to share?
Yeah, we got questions. We definitely got questions. Yeah. Okay, let me try to find. I starred them. We're using a new platform here, so everything's kind of a little bit new to me. But okay, I wanted to zoom in on this question by Cumberland Private Wealth Management. I'm in New England, so whenever I see the word Cumberland, I think Cumberland Farms, which is a gas station chain. Anyway, how do you gain visibility when you're a small niche target company who has common contents that's messaging to very large brands? Crystal, can I jump in on this? Because I feel like they're definitely asking you, but there's definitely a guy here who has unsolicited opinions.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, Cumberland Private Wealth Management. What you're asking here, I think that a lot of people think that every question is related to the technology that underpins what you're trying to do, right? But when you're trying to achieve something in marketing, ask yourself, is this just a general marketing difficulty, or is it made more difficult by the technology? Here, this question is a question you would have if you were competing, as a local business against somebody that's much bigger with greater resources. How do you appeal to the right audiences? And for that, I would say, well, you're a small niche targeted company. There are different valuable, unique selling propositions to working with a smaller company and using that terminology to get in front of the right audience. Like, for example, not everybody wants custom shoes, right? Only a few people want that. You're not competing against Nike. You're competing against somebody who has very specific needs for their feet or very specific use cases. And that's what I think of when I think about this question. I know I took this probably a very different angle than you did, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about here, because a lot of times you can solve problems without getting your hands dirty with technology. The technology is there to help you, not cloud your judgment. And that's unsolicited advice by me. Okay. Crystal, save me.
Okay, so what I would say about this is that I think it's worth thinking about, and I highly recommend. I think we've finally shared my article properly, but have a look at the article that I have in there, because I talk about LLM brand visibility, because I talk about entities, and I talk about making sure that you're distinct as an entity. And if you are Cumberland Private Wealth Management Inc., there's lots of ways that you can make your entity distinct and especially if you are very niche and very targeted. So there will be certain things that only you do, right? And I think that it's important to make sure that that's very clear on your website, but also clear in the ways that you articulate your brand in other spaces. So for instance, if you're a local business, then you have a Google business profile, for instance. You can make sure that you're very distinct there. You can make sure that your about page has very distinct language, and make sure that your entity is clear. And that means that when somebody is looking for something that is of that niche and is in that space, then they're likely to find you if they're looking on ChatGPT, on Perplexity, etc. At this stage, I highly doubt that you're going to get a flood of people coming through from those elements. But I think if you have a look at if you take your keywords, and there's something you can do is take the keywords that you normally rank for, you can pop them into ChatGPT and you can say, can you create some prompts that are similar, that a user might use, that relate to these keywords. You can take that information and it will give you a couple of prompts, and you can test those prompts. Especially if you're a small business, you don't necessarily need to do 700 prompts a day, but you can probably check it once a week and say, okay, these ones, we're on today, we're not on today. And you can even ask it. You're like, why didn't you mention Cumberland Private Wealth Company when I asked you that question? And they'll say, oh, well, because of this, this, and this. And so it's worth getting in there. So I would say get involved. Don't be afraid to articulate who you are. And make sure that you have all of the appropriate citations correctly. So all of those local SEO citations where you have your Facebook and your NAP and all of that sort of stuff, that's all really, really useful. But also think about the way that you're describing your business in those spaces as well, so that it's clear that you are the entity that you are, and that you're distinct in that regard.
All
Okay.
right, excellent.
Oh, I jumped ahead. It's
we have one quick point of clarification earlier when you were talking about being referenced as, the greatest SEO TikToker on the freaking planet. Kwame Shorter asks, wondering if you could be referencing TikTok, YouTube transcripts for this data. So the source of these data is it's not always just websites, it's multimodal, right?
Yeah, so YouTube is referenced. Perplexity in particular very often references video. So if you ask about where can I learn Wix Studio SEO, the video for the Wix Studio SEO course pops up as a source for that. I didn't post that video to YouTube, so I don't think it came from YouTube. And I've not seen other TikTok content come through from LLM. So I was very interested about that one. So I cannot confirm or deny necessarily that TikTok is used as a source, but I think it's very interesting.
I feel like if TikTok, of course, continues to exist worldwide, everywhere that could be seen as a source will be a source. Ultimately, that is the goal of every technology company creating LLMs. Everything that could be a source will be a source. So it's just a matter of whether it's legal, that data is accessible, and things like that. Before we move on, there's about 130 of you watching this, and there's only 3 thumbs up. That's only 1.5 people. Crystal and I have more thumbs between us. Let our bosses know we're at least somewhat entertaining. At least you've been here for 34 minutes, right? We've held your attention. Give us the kudos, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I'm just going to jump back into the things one. Okay, so we've talked about some of the ones where you can browse, some of the ones where you can build your own ones as well, and then I'm going to get into some of the the big boys, some of the the big tools, some of the AI visibility trackers as well. So this is the one that I've spent the most time with. This is Peak AI, and essentially this tracks your activity over time. They cover ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini. Is it Llama or Llama? DeepSeek and Claude, and they let you monitor your prompts, your sources, and your responses. You can segment overall, so you can segment it by everything that's showing. Where you can say our brand overall is getting is shown in 75% of prompts, or you can segment by the topic, or even by the tool as well. So you can say on Perplexity we're doing really well. On Claude, we could be doing better. On DeepSeek, we're doing pretty good, that sort of thing as well. And on this one, so this is an example of one of the dashboards. So here you can see over time, you can see it kind of wiggles around in different things. And essentially the way this one works is, and it's very similar to a lot of these tools, but essentially what it does is it prompts and it prompts regularly. It'll prompt lots and lots and lots, and then it'll prompt regularly. So this one runs every 6 hours. They run whatever prompts you've added in, and depending on what level you're on, you can add in different different amounts of prompts. And this is an example of what it will be like. So again, we were talking about visibility. Visibility will be your mentions, for instance, and then here will be if there's a link. So these will be links to different things as well. So, and then we have your sources. So these will be the sources, the websites that are most providing information about the particular topic. So for instance, if we were say best app for real-time messaging, you can see that Microsoft is showing up again and again and again. And some of the sources that mentioned, it might be that Zapier is one of the sources that's showing up as a reference for that, or this one might have this one showing up as there. And we also mentioned that YouTube, you asked if YouTube was showing. Yes, YouTube does show as a reference for some of these tools. And this one's quite useful for brands of different sizes. And I've been using this one for a while, and I think it's really interesting tool. Brand light. This one has particular emphasis on brand reputation. And this one looks at lots of different information about brand and about about sentiment and about awareness and things like that. This one thinks about ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Gemini. They also have content creation options, brand monitoring as well, to give you sort of real-time insights, and they're covering AI overviews as well. Am I on AI? So this one has some good dashboards. It covers ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Gemini. It has brand monitoring, competitor rank, prompt tracking, source analysis, sentiment analysis, and weekly reports. And so the way that this works is, for instance, it'll query and it'll show you the query. PKI does this one as well, and some of the other ones do as well. And then it'll show you the sources and some of the solutions mentioned and things like that. So it's got a good dashboard in that regard as well. Another one is xfunnel.ai. This one's got market analysis, and it allows you to segment by market. So we were talking about can you see different things? Can you see different things that and how they work and everything? Or can we? You asked me about Beyonce, right? And about the personalization. Well, you can segment, but for instance, by persona, by user journey, by markets here. So if you have a lot of personas and your marketing funnel is very persona driven, then this one might be a good one to think about as well. And again, it tracks your rankings performance and things like that. And again, generally when they're talking about rankings, they're talking about the order of the mentions. Otter AI is another one. You can track this by project, covers ChatGPT, AI overviews, Perplexity. It offers some good reporting exports, and it also helps you to generate prompts from your keywords. So on this one, you can add in, so the keyword was like portfolio submissions, for instance, and it creates prompts for you based on that. And then you can also cycle through, which ones, and you can see screenshots. So it's kind of similar to a few of the other SEO tools that we might be familiar with. And Profound is one that's been that a lot of people are really interested in. You can track it by project. It covers ChatGPT, AI overviews, Perplexity, there's visible analysis, conversational analysis as well. It's got some technical analysis. It gives you lots of bells and whistles, which is also worth thinking about as well. And someone asked, how can you afford all of these things? Well, I think that in terms of that, I think that that's one of the reasons why when we were looking at this, I looked at a huge range of tools and tactics. So you have the option to build something from your own side. You also have the option to use tools or to use a hybrid. So the tracker that I shared, for instance, I created the prompts, and I have the prompts in there. They should be usable for most businesses. You could also do a hybrid of the prompts as well, where you can take that prompt and you can use it to shape ChatGPT to create prompts for you. And you can also use it so that maybe you're doing part of your work on a Google sheet and maybe part of your work on an AI tool as well. And I think that's our sort of overview of some of the AI tools that are available. I think it's a really, really interesting space that we're in right now in terms of AI tracking. I think that it's very exciting because there's so many different tools and there's so many different ways to slice it. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this goes on going forward.
Just returning, first of all, thank you so much for all of that wonderful information, Crystal. I wanted to revisit what Quantum Quill Digital asked. It's a familiar sentiment. How do we afford all these tools, right? That's part of why we suggest that you ask people, how did you hear about us? Because if you are a certain type of business, you might never have people coming from LLMs. On the other hand, as we move forward in time, it's 2025 now, that is likely to be a yes answer more and more, depending on what kind of vertical you're in. And to understand how customers are getting through your door, your physical door, or transacting online, how they're getting on your landing pages, if you know that that is becoming more of a source, then yeah, you need to start investing. But the positive thing here is that you understand that that investment is now justified based on the share of your customers coming from this channel. Then also, you rejigger your digital strategy. Maybe traditional SEO looks a little bit different. Maybe you rely more or less on PPC. That's all marketing is, right? You just find the lever that people are coming through at the moment, do your best to embrace it. And then when times change, as they inevitably will, you get on another Wix SEO Learning Hub webinar and we'll tell you where to go next.
And I think it's also worth that we're thinking about, it's all about whether or not it's worth investing. It's all about ROI, right? So when you ask people, as George is saying, when you're asking like, how did you find us? And you add that as a query to your information, then you can evidence to people higher up, like, hey, we're starting to get loads of these folks. And not only that, but they're good quality. So maybe we should invest in something that will allow us to monitor it better. If you're able to use some of the free tools, like latest GPT, for instance. Someone said ROI, that's return on investment. If you're able to use some of the free tools like a latest GPT tool, like the tool that I've got there as well, and you're able to get some of that evidence, and you're able to make some of the advances, then again, you'll be able to see, okay, we invested this time, we invested this energy, and it led us to have these these leads, these sales, etc. And maybe it's the case that at this time, the investment, you want it to be fairly small because the return is going to be fairly small. But if you're sowing the seeds now, then the growth will eventually get to you quicker.
All right, let's dive into some of these questions. I know a lot of you have questions about the Wix platform. We're going to go a little bit more in order first because we want to honor the topic here. So I want to go back. Let's see here. Derek DeVries, Mr. Popcorn Emoji. I'm assuming you're a Mr. My apologies if not. Speaking of my apologies. Speaking of citations, anecdotally, it seems like GPTs like to train on aggregator directory sites. Have you found this to be true?
Yeah, so this is very, very interesting. This is something that Will Reynolds, again, if you're not following Will Reynolds on LinkedIn, you should be following Will Reynolds on LinkedIn because he's really, really great at talking about these. And he's pointed this out as well, is that he's starting to see a lot of directories, listicles. I recently was pulling together some data on SEO events for 2025. And I think it was Perplexity, and literally it cited all of its links, and all of its links were from one listicle web page that was very, very low quality. And that now, and in that regard, I think that we have a few things going on. So a lot of the models are moving really, really fast. So the ChatGPT 4 is much, much bigger than ChatGPT 3. If you're a Wix user and you're using ChatGPT 4 to help you to create content on Wix, to create meta descriptions on Wix, because we've just updated our meta tag our meta tag AI tool to include GPT-4, for instance. That has way, way, way more parameters, way, way, way more capabilities in terms of reasoning and in terms of output than its predecessor. However, some of the other tools, so DeepSeek's recently hit the scene, and DeepSeek has different reasoning. So DeepSeek relies heavily on NLP, for instance, and it seems, anecdotally, it seems at the moment that some of those listicles and so some of those like very easy to access listicles seem to seem to perform pretty well in some of those NLP enabled LLM models. So it's interesting. However, it is changing rapidly. So it's worth having information on what your core queries are. If you're a business and you have a website that's working really well, I mean, you almost certainly know like your core keywords. If you're an ice cream shop, if you're an ice cream shop in Santa Monica, you will know that people search ice cream Santa Monica, and if you show up at the top, then you're generally going to get like good business, for instance. So if you know what some of those core queries are for your business on ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever, then it's worth checking on them every now and then to see how much they've changed and see how often they've changed. I talk about this in my talk from Brighton SEO, and basically when I first dropped, I was like, "Who's Crystal Carter?" And they were like, "I don't know who you are." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then a few months later, I said, "Who's Crystal Carter?" And they said, "Oh, Crystal Carter works at Wix, blah, 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 blah." So it's important to remember that these things will change. So you should know the ones that are your core ones and make sure that you're checking on them regularly. These tools will help you do it. But if you're a smaller business, then you don't have to do it every day, every 7 hours. You could do it once a week. You could do it once a month even, just to see where you are with that.
I also would add that if you're seeing something work right now, just like is the game in SEO, whether your agency or whoever likes to admit it or not, is if something works now, it might not. The greater likelihood is that it will not, unless it's a regular tactic like cite your sources, provide good information. Those are things that are timeless. But if you're seeing, oh, my competitors are popping up because they appear in these listicles, I want to appear in those listicles, I'm going to get in touch with the webmaster. I'm going to, I don't know, do something to get in there, right? Expect for that to work while it's working. And when it doesn't, you need to move on. Don't decry like, oh, SEO is broken or LLMs broken. This is just like every platform is out there to find the ways that you're gaming it, and all the data sets are only getting larger. No one is training on less data. So as those data sets get larger, the likelihood of any simple manipulation like that, any lever you can pull, is going to go away. And that's another conversation that we'll have when that maturity in the industry comes. Okay, simple question here. 3 words, Grok a thing. Grok is the AI platform associated with the social media network X, formerly Twitter. My opinion here, Crystal, is that Grok is a thing if it's a thing for your audience.
Yeah, that's worth thinking about. I think there aren't not as many of the tools are using Grok. If it's something that you find is useful, then that's useful. And not a lot of the tools are using I don't know if it's Llama or Llama, and not as many of them are using that as well. But sometimes that has to do with how it works. So sometimes it will be the back engine. So for instance, like Llama tends to be one of the basis tools for some of it. So like DeepSeek uses Llama as part of its tool, for instance, and it's like an open source. It's an open source LLM sort of setup. So it forms part of DeepSeek, but it doesn't really have as much of the user that. It doesn't have as much as a user-facing thing. So I think that with Grok, it might change in the future. Not a lot of the tools are looking at it, and I can't speak too much on it because I haven't been on it very much. But that could very well change in the future. If you look at the spread of LLMs, ChatGPT is essentially the Google of AI tools. So the last time I checked, I think the ChatGPT was pulling in something like 87% of LLM searches were happening via ChatGPT, and part of that has to do with the different bells and whistles and also their sort of first mover positioning. So I think that it's worth thinking about that as well.
Okay, and there's always somebody with a local question, and I love that because it's worth asking. Right? Joined a little late, not sure if you've covered this, but have you gone over local instances of LLM tools and the opportunities to disclose secure information using these tools, right? So we're talking here, I'm assuming like not local SEO, like I was mentioning, but like local as in on your computer instead of in the cloud here. Very important depending on your company's data practices.
Yeah, so I think that for these ones, you might want to build your own. And I know that there are people that are doing that. And again, I think tools like, if you've got an API connection, I cannot confirm, but I would probably check with GPT for Sheets to see if you can connect to your own API to use it for some of that scraping. And you can essentially set up a Google sheet or an Excel sheet that essentially does some of those queries for you, and then you can create dashboards, et cetera from that. So that would be the thing that I would look at. I will have a look at that when we do the write-up for this article, because I think that's worth considering, because data privacy is really important for these tools. But yeah, I think that if my first port of call would probably to see if I could do something custom via a private API.
Okay, I'm going to pop into the chat a link to an article recently published by Gus Pelosia on 3 SEO tools that he built with ChatGPT and Colab. That even if you are not super interested in the exact tools he builds, right? Seeing the approach that he uses, I think it always kind of eludes us, or the capability that we're looking for isn't exactly what we have the skill to do. We are living in the future. ChatGPT can help you do it. So check out that article. Okay. I think that was the majority of the questions related to LLMs. Before we head out, Crystal, is there any other final piece of advice that you wanted people to understand before they got into this, or anything else that you perhaps forgot to mention as we went over everything?
I think the only thing that I would say is that if you're interested in monitoring your visibility on LLMs, then it's really, really important to get involved. Yeah. So don't just sit on the sidelines, get in there, use them, try them, test things. And in the same way that we do with SEO, where you see where you are. So run the query, see where you are, make the optimization, go back and see. I've done this recently. I've done this on a few different occasions. In the document that I've shown, the document that's shared in the article that on the Wix SEO Learning Hub about LLM optimization, I talked about giving feedback. So I had a website that wasn't known to Gemini. And then later on, it was known to Gemini. And I said, well, what's the URL for this website? And it said it was on Behance. And I said, no, it's not. It's on siteofsites.co. And she and then later on I went back to it and I said, what's the URL for Site of Sites? And it said it's on siteofsites.co. So if you're able to give it feedback, that's really useful. Similarly, I recently made some entity optimizations for a project that I was working on separately, and I've seen that have impact already within about a week. So that's been really good as well. So I think that it's really, really important to take the same kind of testing approach that you would to any of your SEO, but you need to be able to monitor in order to test and to demonstrate progress and improvement. So just pick a tool as your source of truth. Pick a tool so that you can monitor it and go forth with and optimize.
Yeah, that's pretty much. I think that's a great one to end on. Thank you all so much for being such a great crowd, so lively in the chat, so polite as well. Again, I am George Nguyen for Wix Studio here with Crystal Carter, and we will see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.